What kind of person smashes a child's wheelchair in broad daylight? The sun hung low over Maplewood Lane, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the suburban enclave. In the heart of this quiet neighborhood, where picket fences gleamed and roses bloomed in perfect rows, a storm was brewing. Karen Whitaker, the self-appointed guardian of the Maplewood Homeowners Association, stood on her pristine porch, her eyes narrowed at the sight of a bright blue wheelchair parked unevenly on the sidewalk across the street. It belonged to Tommy Ellis, a 10-year-old boy with cerebral palsy, who lived with his mother, Sarah, in the modest two-story house at number 47. To Karen, that wheelchair was an eyesore, a blemish on her vision of suburban perfection. To Tommy, it was his legs, his freedom, his way to chase dreams despite a body that fought him at every turn. Karen's heels clicked sharply as she marched across the street, her clipboard clutched like a weapon. She'd spent years enforcing HOA rules with an iron fist, grass too tall, mailboxes slightly askew, or a single weed daring to sprout in a driveway could summon her wrath. But this wheelchair, left out overnight, was a personal affront. She'd sent Sarah 3 notices already, each more curt than the last, demanding it be stored out of sight. Sarah, a single mother juggling 2 jobs and Tommy's medical needs, hadn't had time to comply. Karen didn't care. She saw defiance in every untrimmed hedge, every unhidden imperfection. Without a word, Karen grabbed the wheelchair's handles, her manicured nails digging into the worn grips. She dragged it to the curb, where the garbage truck would arrive in an hour. Then, with a glance over her shoulder to ensure no one was watching, she raised her foot and stomped. The frame buckled under her heel. Once, twice, 3 times, she didn't stop until the wheels were warped, the seat torn, and the metal frame a twisted ruin. Her breath came in sharp bursts, her face flushed with a mix of triumph and rage. She dusted off her hands, straightened her blazer, and walked back to her house, leaving the wreckage behind like a trophy. Across the street, Tommy's bedroom window faced the sidewalk. He'd woken early, as he often did, to watch the sparrows hop along the grass. His small hands gripped the windowsill as he stared, wide-eyed, at the mangled remains of his wheelchair. His throat tightened but no sound came out. He didn't need to scream for Sarah to know something was wrong. She rushed in, following his gaze, and her heart plummeted. "Oh, Tommy," she whispered, pulling him close. Her voice trembled, but her eyes burned with a fire she hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just a broken wheelchair. It was an attack on her son, on their life, on their right to exist in this neighborhood. Sarah pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed 911. She didn't know the legal details, but she knew this was wrong, deeply viciously wrong. The operator's calm voice contrasted with the chaos in her chest. "Someone destroyed my son's wheelchair," she said, her words catching. "It's his only way to move around. We need help." The operator promised an officer would be there soon. Sarah hung up and knelt beside Tommy, brushing his hair back. "We're going to fix this," she said, her voice steadying. "I promise." Meanwhile, Karen sat in her kitchen, sipping coffee, oblivious to the storm she'd unleashed. She scrolled through her HOA spreadsheet, mentally checking off the wheelchair issue as resolved. She didn't know that the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, protected Tommy's right to keep his wheelchair accessible, or that destroying it was not just cruel but a federal offense. She didn't know that Officer Daniels, a veteran cop with a daughter in a wheelchair, was already pulling into Maplewood Lane, his jaw tight as he listened to the dispatch call. The neighborhood began to stir. Neighbors peeked through curtains, drawn by the flashing lights of the police cruiser. Sarah stood on her porch, holding Tommy's hand, as Officer Daniels examined the wreckage. His face darkened as he took photos, his radio crackling with updates. "This is an ADA violation," he said, his voice low but firm. "Whoever did this is in serious trouble." Sarah's eyes met his, and for the first time that morning, she felt a flicker of hope. Karen, still in her kitchen, heard the doorbell. She opened it to find Officer Daniels, his badge gleaming, his expression unreadable. Behind him, a small crowd had gathered, neighbors she'd bullied into compliance over the years, now watching with a mix of curiosity and satisfaction. "Mrs. Whitaker," Daniels said, "we need to talk about a wheelchair." Karen's smile froze. Her clipboard slipped from her hands, landing with a soft thud on the polished floor. The air on Maplewood Lane felt thick, charged with the weight of what was to come. Karen's world, built on rules and control, was about to unravel. And Sarah, who'd spent years quietly enduring, was ready to fight, not just for Tommy, but for every family who'd ever felt crushed under the weight of someone else's judgment. Karen's kitchen felt smaller as Officer Daniels stepped inside, his boots heavy on her hardwood floor. She gestured to a chair, her smile tight, but he remained standing, his notebook open. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "witnesses saw you near the Ellis boys' wheelchair this morning. Care to explain?" Her pulse quickened, but she kept her voice smooth. "I was just tidying up the neighborhood. That thing was an eyesore, left out all night. I moved it to the curb for pickup." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "Moved it? Or destroyed it?" Karen's laugh was sharp like glass breaking. "I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe some kids messed with it." Outside, Sarah stood with Tommy, her arms wrapped around him as neighbors whispered. She'd always kept to herself, avoiding Karen's HOA meetings and endless complaints about her unmowed lawn or Tommy's ramp, which Karen claimed clashed with the aesthetic. But now Sarah's silence was gone. She'd spent years swallowing her anger, working double shifts to afford Tommy's therapies, apologizing for existing in a neighborhood that felt like it belonged to Karen. Not today. Today she was done. Daniels scribbled in his notebook, his eyes never leaving Karen. "Destroying a mobility device isn't just vandalism, Mrs. Whitaker. It's a federal offense under the ADA. You're looking at fines, maybe jail time." Karen's face paled, but she doubled down. "I didn't touch it. You have no proof." She crossed her arms, her confidence a thin veneer. Daniels nodded toward the street. "We've got a Ring camera from number 45. Clear footage. Want to see it?" Karen's stomach dropped. She hadn't noticed the camera, hadn't thought anyone would care enough to check. Her mind raced for an excuse, but none came. She'd always prided herself on control, over her lawn, her rules, her neighbors' lives. Now that control was slipping. "It was an accident," she stammered. "I tripped, maybe kicked it too hard." Daniels didn't blink. "You tripped 3 times? Hard enough to bend steel." Across the street, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was Maria, her coworker at the diner who lived 2 blocks away. "Sarah, I saw the post on the neighborhood app." Maria's voice crackled. "Everyone's talking about what Karen did. I'm coming over." Sarah frowned. "Post? What post?" Maria hesitated. "Someone uploaded the Ring footage. It's gone viral in the group. People are furious." Sarah's heart raced. She hadn't expected this, hadn't wanted a spectacle. But as she looked at Tommy, his small face etched with hurt, she realized this wasn't just about them anymore. Maria arrived minutes later, her car screeching to a stop. She wasn't alone. 2 other neighbors, Mr. Patel from number 50 and Mrs. Carter from the corner house, joined her. They'd all received Karen's notices over the years, fines for a crooked mailbox, warnings about kids' bikes left out. They stood by Sarah now, their presence a quiet rebellion. Mr. Patel, usually soft-spoken, muttered, "She's gone too far this time." Mrs. Carter nodded, her eyes on the mangled wheelchair. "That's not just a chair. That's Tommy's life." Inside, Karen's voice rose, shrill and defensive. "I was protecting property values. That wheelchair made the street look trashy." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You think a kid's mobility is trashy?" He stepped closer, his voice low. "You're not just facing charges, Mrs. Whitaker. You're facing this entire neighborhood." Karen glanced out the window and saw the growing crowd. Her neighbors, once cowed by her authority, now stared back with defiance. Then came the twist no one expected. Maria, holding her phone, whispered to Sarah, "Check the app." Sarah opened the neighborhood group and froze. The Ring footage wasn't the only video circulating. Someone had posted a second clip, grainy but unmistakable, from a different angle, Karen's own security camera. It showed her stomping on the wheelchair, her face twisted with rage, and in the background, a glimpse of her own son, Ethan, watching from their porch. He was 16, quiet, always in his mother's shadow. His expression in the video was one of horror, his hands clenched at his sides. The caption read. Even her own kids saw it. Sarah's breath caught. Ethan had always been polite, helping Tommy with his backpack at the bus stop, never mentioning his mother's crusade. Had he known? Had he tried to stop her? The video shifted something in Sarah. This wasn't just about Karen's cruelty. It was about a community waking up, about a boycott between loyalty and shame, about a mother and son fighting to reclaim their place. She squeezed Tommy's hand. "We're not alone," she whispered. Karen, oblivious to the second video, was still arguing with Daniels. But the walls were closing in. The truth was out, captured in pixels and shared across screens, and no amount of HOA rules could rewrite it. The street outside Karen's house pulsed with tension, like a storm about to break. Officer Daniels stood firm, his radio crackling as he requested backup. The crowd of neighbors grew, their murmurs rising into a low hum of anger. Sarah held Tommy close, her eyes locked on Karen's front door. The ring footage had spread like wildfire, and now the second video, Karen's own camera capturing her son's horrified face, added fuel to the flames. Maplewood Lane, once a place of quiet compliance, was no longer Karen's kingdom. Inside, Karen's voice cracked as she faced Daniels. "You can't arrest me over a wheelchair. This is my neighborhood." Her hands trembled, but she clung to her authority like a lifeline. Daniels didn't flinch. "It's not about the wheelchair, Mrs. Whitaker. It's about violating federal law. The ADA doesn't care about your HOA bylaws." He gestured to the window where the crowd was visible. "And neither do they." Karen's eyes darted outside, and for the first time fear flickered across her face. She wasn't used to being challenged, let alone surrounded. Sarah, meanwhile, felt the weight of the crowd's support. Mr. Patel stepped forward, his voice steady. "We've put up with her for years, her fines, her threats. This ends now." Mrs. Carter nodded, her arms crossed. "Tommy's a good kid. He doesn't deserve this." Sarah's throat tightened. She'd always felt like an outsider here. Her small house and single income no match for the polished perfection of Maplewood. But now these neighbors, once strangers, were standing with her. It was more than she dared hope for. Then Ethan appeared. He slipped out of Karen's house, his hoodie pulled low, avoiding his mother's gaze. The crowd parted as he approached Sarah and Tommy. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry," he said, his eyes on the ground. "I saw her do it. I should have stopped her." Sarah's heart twisted. Ethan was just a kid, caught in his mother's orbit. She reached out, touching his shoulder. "You're not your mom, Ethan. You don't have to carry this." Tommy looked up, his small hand reaching for Ethan's. "It's okay," he said, his voice soft but clear. The crowd fell silent, the weight of Tommy's forgiveness heavier than any accusation. Karen, watching from her window, felt a pang she couldn't name. Ethan had always been her shadow, quiet and obedient, never questioning her rules. Seeing him with Sarah and Tommy, his head bowed, cracked something in her. But she pushed it down, her pride too stubborn to bend. "This is ridiculous," she snapped at Daniels. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Daniels didn't answer. He was watching the second police cruiser pull up, its lights flashing. The confrontation escalated as the second officer, a woman named Rodriguez, stepped out. She carried a tablet, the ring footage paused on its screen. "Mrs. Whitaker," she said, her tone clipped. "This is you, correct?" The video played, Karen's heel slamming into the wheelchair, the metal screeching. The crowd gasped. Karen's face drained of color. That's not what it looks like," she stammered. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "It looks like you destroying a child's mobility device. Care to explain?" Karen's mind raced. She could lie, claim it was an accident, but the videos, both of them, were undeniable. Her own camera had betrayed her, and Ethan's presence in the footage made it worse. She glanced at her son, now standing with Sarah, and felt a surge of betrayal. "Ethan," she called, her voice sharp. "Get back here." But Ethan didn't move. His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw defiance in them. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a chorus of frustration. "She's been terrorizing us for years," shouted Mr. Patel. Fining us for nothing, threatening lawsuits. Mrs. Carter chimed in. She told me my roses were too red. Who does that? The accusations piled up, each one a brick in the wall closing Karen in. Daniels raised a hand for quiet. Mrs. Whitaker, you're coming with us to answer some questions. Let's do this calmly. Karen's knees buckled, but she caught herself on the counter. You can't arrest me, she cried. I'm the president of the HOA. Rodriguez stepped forward, her voice cold. The HOA doesn't make you above the law. You violated the ADA, committed vandalism, and caused emotional distress to a minor. Cuffs or no cuffs, you're coming. The crowd cheered, a raw, unfiltered sound that shook Karen to her core. As Daniels and Rodriguez led her to the cruiser, the reality hit. This wasn't just about a wheelchair. It was about power, control, and the community she tried to dominate. Sarah watched, her arm around Tommy, feeling not triumph but relief. Ethan stood beside them, his shoulders slumped but his face resolute. The neighborhood was waking up, and Karen's reign was crumbling. The police cruiser's door slammed shut, sealing Karen inside. Her face pressed against the window, her eyes wide with disbelief as the crowd watched her being driven away. Maplewood Lane, once her domain, now felt like a foreign land. The neighbors didn't scatter. They stayed, their voices blending into a hum of solidarity. Sarah knelt beside Tommy, her hands cupping his face. You okay, buddy? She asked. Tommy nodded, his eyes on the twisted remains of his wheelchair. Will I get a new one? He asked, his voice small but steady. Sarah's heart ached, but she smiled. We'll make sure of it. Back at the house, Ethan lingered on the sidewalk, his hands stuffed in his pockets. He hadn't gone with his mother, hadn't even looked at her as the cruiser pulled away. Sarah approached him, her voice gentle. You don't have to stay here, Ethan. Come inside with us. He hesitated, then nodded, following her and Tommy into their small, cluttered home. The living room was a mess of medical supplies and Tommy's drawings, but it felt warm, lived in. Nothing like the sterile perfection of Karen's house. Ethan sat on the couch, staring at his shoes. I didn't know she'd do that, he said. I thought she was just strict. Sarah sat across from him, her eyes kind but firm. She's your mom, Ethan. But what she did was wrong. You don't have to defend her. Outside, the neighborhood app buzzed with activity. The videos had spread beyond Maplewood, picked up by local news outlets. Comments flooded in, some calling for Karen's arrest, others sharing their own stories of her tyranny. She fined me $200 for a cracked driveway, one user wrote. Told me my dog's bark was disruptive to the community, another added. The outrage was palpable, a digital wave crashing over Karen's carefully curated image. At the police station, Karen sat in a small gray room, her blazer wrinkled, her hair falling out of its tight bun. Officer Daniels sat across from her, his notebook open. Let's try this again, he said. Why did you destroy the wheelchair? Karen's lips trembled, but she clung to her story. It was an accident. I was moving it and it broke. Daniels leaned forward, his voice low. We have 2 videos, Mrs. Whitaker. Your own camera shows you stomping on it. Your son saw you. Stop lying. Karen's hands clenched into fists. I was protecting the neighborhood. That family, they don't belong here. They're messy, non-compliant. Daniel's eyes narrowed. They have every right to be here. Tommy's wheelchair is protected under federal law. You knew that, didn't you? Karen didn't answer. She hadn't known, not really. She'd never bothered to read the ADA guidelines, assuming her HOA rules trumped everything. Now the weight of her ignorance pressed down on her. Daniels continued. You're facing felony vandalism, ADA violations, and potential civil suits. The Ellis family could sue you for emotional distress. You've got a lot to answer for. Karen's facade cracked, her shoulders slumping. For the first time, she felt small, stripped of the power she'd wielded for years. Back at Sarah's house, Maria arrived with a bag of groceries and a laptop. I started a fundraiser, she said, her eyes bright. The neighborhood's pitching in for a new wheelchair for Tommy. Sarah blinked, overwhelmed. You didn't have to, Maria cut her off. We wanted to. This isn't just about you and Tommy. It's about all of us taking back our street. The fundraisers page was already at $3,000, with donations from neighbors, co-workers, even strangers who'd seen the videos. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she read the messages. For Tommy, keep shining. Maplewood stands with you. Ethan, still on the couch, watched silently. He opened his phone, scrolling through the app, and saw the second video again. His own face frozen in shock as his mother destroyed Tommy's wheelchair. He hadn't known their camera was recording, hadn't realized his silence would be captured. He typed a message in the group, his fingers shaking. I'm sorry for what my mom did. I'll help make it right. He hit send before he could change his mind. The responses came fast, not with anger but with kindness. You're a good kid, Ethan, one neighbor wrote. We've got your back. Karen's world was collapsing, but Sarah's was rising. The neighborhood, once fractured by fear, was knitting itself together. Tommy, coloring at the kitchen table, looked up at Ethan and grinned. "Wanna draw with me?" he asked. Ethan hesitated, then took a crayon. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged somewhere other than his mother's shadow. The police station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Karen sat, her hands cuffed to the table. The reality of her actions settled like a stone in her chest. Officer Daniels had left her alone, the door clicking shut, giving her time to think. But thinking was dangerous now. Every rule she'd enforced, every fine she'd issued, every neighbor she'd intimidated, it all led to this moment. She'd built her identity on control, on being the one who decided what Maplewood Lane should be. Now that identity was in tatters. Outside, the fundraiser for Tommy's wheelchair climbed past $5,000. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, refreshing the page, her eyes wide. Neighbors she'd barely spoken to had donated, some leaving messages about their own run-ins with Karen. She tried to find me for my kids' chalk drawings, one wrote. This is for Tommy and for all of us. Sarah's hand shook as she showed Maria. I can't believe this, she whispered. Maria grinned. Believe it. People want to do right when they see wrong. Tommy, oblivious to the numbers, was busy showing Ethan how to draw a rocket ship. Ethan's smile was tentative, but it was there. A crack in the wall he'd built to survive his mother's reign. At the station, Officer Rodriguez returned, a file in hand. Mrs. Whitaker, she said, the DIS reviewing your case. You're looking at up to 7 years for felony vandalism, plus federal penalties for the ADA violation. The Ellis family's lawyer is already involved. Karen's breath hitched. 7 years, she whispered. Rodriguez nodded. You didn't just break a wheelchair. You targeted a disabled child. Courts don't take kindly to that. Karen's mind reeled. She'd never imagined consequences like this. Fines maybe, or a slap on the wrist. But prison, her perfect life, her house, her status, her control, slipped away like sand through her fingers. Back on Maplewood Lane, the neighborhood was alive. Mr. Patel organized a cleanup, hauling the mangled wheelchair to the curb for evidence collection. Mrs. Carter brought over a tray of cookies, her eyes soft as she hugged Sarah. We should have stood up to her sooner, she said. Sarah shook her head. You're here now. That's what matters. The crowd wasn't just angry. They were hopeful, rebuilding something Karen had tried to break. A news van pulled up, a reporter interviewing neighbors about the viral videos. Sarah stayed out of it, shielding Tommy, but the story was spreading. HOA president arrested for destroying child's wheelchair. The headline would read. Ethan, still at Sarah's, saw the news van and tensed. He'd always been invisible, the kid who didn't make waves, who followed his mother's orders. But now, his name was in the comments, his face in the video. He opened the neighborhood app again, reading the messages. Ethan, you're not your mom, one said. Come to our barbecue this weekend, another offered. He looked at Tommy, who was laughing as he colored a star yellow. You're good at this, Tommy said. Ethan's throat tightened. Thanks, he managed, his voice thick. At the station, Karen's lawyer arrived, a harried man in a cheap suit. This is a mess, Karen, he said, flipping through papers. The evidence is airtight. 2 videos, witnesses, even your son's statement. Karen's head snapped up. Ethan? He wouldn't. The lawyer cut her off. He didn't have to. His face in that video says enough. The DA's pushing for a public apology, restitution, and jail time. Karen's hands shook. Ethan, her own son, was part of her downfall. She'd raised him to obey, to uphold her rules. Now he was slipping away just like everything else. Sarah, meanwhile, got a call from the medical supply company. The fundraiser had enough to cover a new wheelchair, custom-fitted for Tommy, with extra funds for his therapies. She cried, not from sadness but from a relief so deep it felt like breathing for the first time. Maria hugged her, laughing. "This is what happens when people come together," she said. Sarah nodded, looking at Tommy and Ethan, their heads bent over the drawing. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was theirs again. Karen's world was gone. Her house, her title, her power, all reduced to a cold metal table and a pair of handcuffs. She thought of Ethan, of the neighbors she'd controlled, of the wheelchair she'd smashed. For the first time she wondered if she'd been wrong, not just about the law but about everything. The next morning Maplewood Lane buzzed with a new energy. The news van was gone, but the story lingered, a reminder of the line Karen had crossed. Sarah woke early, making pancakes for Tommy and Ethan, who'd stayed the night on the couch. The boys laughed over breakfast, Tommy's giggle filling the small kitchen. Sarah watched them, her heart full but heavy. The fundraiser had hit $8,000, enough for a new wheelchair and more. She'd called the medical supply company, and they promised delivery by the end of the week. But the victory felt bittersweet. Tommy's old chair, with its familiar squeak and worn armrests, was gone, a casualty of Karen's rage. At the police station, Karen faced her first court appearance. The room was small, the judge's face stern. Her lawyer argued for bail, citing her community standing, but the prosecutor was relentless. The defendant targeted a disabled child's mobility device, she said, holding up stills from the ring footage. This wasn't an accident, it was deliberate, malicious, and a clear ADA violation. The judge set bail at $50,000, a sum Karen could barely cover. She sat stunned as the gavel fell. Her neighbors, her rules, her life. Everything she built was unraveling. Back on Maplewood Lane, the neighborhood organized a meeting, not in Karen's pristine community center, but in Mr. Patel's backyard. Chairs were mismatched, the grass uneven, but no one cared. Mrs. Carter passed out lemonade as neighbors shared stories of Karen's overreach. Fines for holiday lights, threats over unapproved paint colors. "She made us feel like tenants in our own homes," Mr. Patel said. Sarah listened, holding Tommy's hand. She hadn't planned to speak, but the words came. "Tommy's been through enough," she said. "He just wants to play, to be a kid." Karen took that from him. The crowd nodded, their resolve hardening. They voted to dissolve the HOA's current board and elect new leadership. Sarah declined a nomination, but Mr. Patel stepped up, promising fairness. Ethan, sitting at the edge of the group, felt the shift. He'd always been Karen's son, invisible behind her clipboard. Now people smiled at him, asked how he was. He didn't know how to handle it. After the meeting, he helped Tommy carry lemonade cups to the kitchen. "You're staying, right?" Tommy asked, his eyes wide. Ethan nodded, unsure but unwilling to leave. Sarah overheard and squeezed his shoulder. "You're always welcome here," she said. Ethan's chest tightened. He wasn't used to kindness without strings. Karen, released on bail, returned to an empty house. The silence was deafening. No Ethan, no neighbors knocking, no HOA meetings to run. She opened the neighborhood app, her fingers trembling. The comments were brutal. "She deserves worse. Good riddance. Tommy's stronger than she'll ever be." She saw Ethan's message, his apology to the neighborhood, and her heart twisted. She'd raised him to follow her, to enforce her rules. Now he was choosing them, Sarah, Tommy, the neighbors she'd dismissed. She sank onto the couch, the weight of her isolation crushing her. The news cycle churned. The story had gone national with headlines like, "HOA tyrant faces jail for destroying child's wheelchair." Activists shared Tommy's story, calling for stronger ADA protections. Sarah got calls from lawyers offering to represent them pro bono. She hadn't wanted a lawsuit, but the offers gave her power she'd never had. She met with one attorney, a kind woman named Lisa, who explained their options. "You could sue Karen personally," Lisa said. "Emotional distress, property damage, ADA violations. She'd be liable for a lot. Sarah hesitated. She didn't want revenge, but she wanted justice. For Tommy, for Ethan, for everyone Karen had hurt. By evening, the neighborhood was planning a barbecue, a celebration of their new freedom. Tommy's new wheelchair arrived early, sleek and blue, with a joystick he could control. He zoomed around the backyard, laughing as Ethan chased him. Sarah watched, her eyes misty. Maria leaned in, grinning. "This is what community looks like," she said. Sarah nodded, feeling the truth of it. Maplewood Lane wasn't perfect, but it was healing stitch by stitch. Karen, alone in her house, saw the barbecue from her window. Laughter drifted over, a sound she'd never been part of. She thought of Ethan, of the wheelchair, of the rules she'd clung to. For the first time, she wondered what she'd gained from it all. Her empire was gone, and all she had left was regret. The barbecue on Maplewood Lane glowed under the setting sun, string lights twinkling over Mr. Patel's backyard. Kids ran through the grass, their laughter mixing with the sizzle of burgers on the grill. Tommy, in his new wheelchair, chased a soccer ball with Ethan, his grin brighter than the lights. Sarah stood with Maria, watching the scene, her heart full. Neighbors who'd once avoided her now shared stories, offered hugs, asked about Tommy's favorite games. The fundraiser had grown to $10,000, enough for therapies and a savings fund for Tommy's future. Sarah hadn't known a community could feel like this, like family, flawed but fierce. Across the street, Karen's house was dark, the curtains drawn. She'd spent the day avoiding her phone, the endless notifications a reminder of her fall. The lawyer had called, urging her to prepare a public apology, to show remorse before the case went further. She hadn't wanted to listen, but the alternative, years in prison, her life dismantled, was worse. She sat at her desk, pen in hand, trying to write. "I'm sorry" felt foreign, like a language she'd never learned. She thought of Ethan, now at the barbecue laughing with Tommy. She'd lost him, not to the neighborhood but to her own choices. At the barbecue, Mr. Patel took the makeshift stage, a picnic table covered with a checkered cloth. "We're done with fear," he said, his voice carrying. "Maplewood is ours again. For Tommy, for Sarah, for all of us." The crowd cheered, glasses raised. Sarah felt Tommy's hand slip into hers. "I like this," he whispered. She knelt, kissing his forehead. "Me too, buddy." Ethan stood nearby, watching the crowd. A neighbor, Mrs. Carter, handed him a soda. "You're one of us, Ethan," she said. He nodded, a small smile breaking through. For the first time he felt seen, not as Karen's son but as himself. The news cycle slowed, but Tommy's story lingered, inspiring petitions for stronger ADA enforcement and community-led initiatives. Sarah met with the lawyer Lisa again, deciding to pursue a civil suit against Karen, not for money but for accountability. "She needs to understand," Sarah said. "This can't happen again." Lisa nodded, drafting papers that would ensure Karen faced the consequences of her actions, financially and publicly. The neighborhood supported it, some even offering to testify about Karen's years of intimidation. Karen's court date loomed. She finally wrote the apology, her words stiff but honest. "I was wrong," she wrote. "I hurt a child and a community. I'll accept the consequences." She didn't expect forgiveness, didn't even want it. She just wanted to stop running from herself. She posted it on the neighborhood app, knowing Ethan would see it. He did, late that night after the barbecue. He read it silently, then set his phone down. He didn't reply, but he didn't need to. He was building a new life, one where he could be proud of who he was, not who his mother wanted him to be. Weeks later, Tommy's laughter echoed through Maplewood Lane as he raced his new wheelchair down the sidewalk, Ethan jogging beside him. Sarah watched from the porch, her coffee warm in her hands. The neighborhood wasn't perfect. There were still disagreements, still messes, but it was alive, connected, free. The HOA was restructured, with Mr. Patel leading a board that prioritized people over rules. Sarah joined, not as a leader but as a voice for Tommy, for families like theirs. Karen's trial came and went. She pleaded guilty, avoiding prison but facing heavy fines and community service. She sold her house, unable to afford it, and moved to a small apartment across town. Ethan stayed with Sarah most days, finding a home where he could breathe. He visited his mother sometimes, but it was different now, quiet, careful, like mending a broken thread. Maplewood Lane thrived. Tommy's new wheelchair became a symbol, not of loss but of resilience. Neighbors planted flowers along the sidewalks, not for perfection but for joy. Sarah looked at her son, at Ethan, at the community that had risen from Karen's ashes, and felt something she hadn't in years: hope. It wasn't just about a wheelchair or a lawsuit. It was about standing up together and choosing kindness over control. The sun set, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink. Tommy zoomed past, laughing, and Sarah knew they'd be okay. They all would.